notes are
But I want
falling apart.
so I can see what it was.
Okay, that's right.
All right, I won't spread out too badly. Well, maybe I will.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to the December 3rd, 2012 Washougal City Council meeting and ask that you please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Boger. Here. Councilmember Kaminsky.
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee.
Here.
Councilmember Lindsay.
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel.
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Here.
Thank you, Rose. Under amendments to the agenda, I do have one amendment for you this evening, which would be to add an executive session to the end of the agenda after council member comments. Are there any other amendments to the agenda? Okay, Rose, do we have any correspondence?
Yes, we do. We have a letter dated November 28th from Mike Briggs. He asked that it be read into the record. City of Washougal Mayor and City Council. I have read that the city is looking over the proposed budget for 2013. I understand the city holds reserves of approximately $2.9 million, and this represents 26% of the operating budget for the city. City Council policy states 16% should be held in these reserves for internal cash flow purposes. The city holds a 10% surplus for a reserve fund. First, my congratulations for accumulating this amount of surplus money in the city reserve funds. This is a good thing. If the city does decide to go into private contract with the company to take over at least partially the Public Works Department, I predict there will be an expense arise from the city that were not expected due to the new business decision for the city. The reserve surplus might go to pay for those unexpected expenses that I am confident will arise. However, if the city does not elect to go into the private contract to take over the city public works, I do think it prudent and proper to invest other areas that this reserve surplus might be used. I think that the $95,000 fund to help low-income residents pay a portion of their utility is an excellent, prudent, and charitable thing for the city to do, and I applaud this financial effort. While as one of our city council was recently quoted as proclaiming, the city does not belong in the charity business, I might remind the city that using taxes for help of all citizens, all of our city and its citizens, including those of the low income in Washougal, has a disproportionate share, and this is not a good idea. Not a good idea, but your duty. If the city taxes cannot and should not be used to help some of our citizens, especially when the city is raising its utilities a great deal in a short time, what good can taxes do? No, I reject the idea that the city of Washougal cannot be charitable during these hard financial times for people in low income. As to the idea of a fee holiday for 2013 for certain commercial and multi-use fees, is also a good idea. If the city wishes to encourage business growth in Washougal, the reduction of these fees in all of 2013 would be a great incentive for businesses to come to Washougal instead of other communities who offer no fee holiday. And I also think the use of reserve funds for this endeavor is prudent and a very good investment for Washougal's future. For those on the council who might not agree, look at it this way. How much money in the reserve surplus is making you now in the bank over that which it may make you in the hands of enterprises and eager business entrepreneurs? As the country slowly begins to rise with a growing economy, Washougal should take note and pave the way for new business in our community. Now is a very good time for investing in Washougal and its future. As a concerned citizen, I would like to see Washougal be more optimistic and enterprising with its business decisions, and to use those reserve funds in the most advantageous and charitable ways it can. Respectfully, Mike Briggs, 2668 West 9th Street, Washougal, Washington.
Thank you, Rose.
Rose, could I get a copy of that email to me?
Yes. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would like that too.
How about I just distribute it to the whole
That would
county?
be great. Thank you.
Rose, any other correspondence?
No.
Okay. We're at the first opportunity in the agenda for anybody from the public that would like to address council. Harvey, good evening.
Harvey Olson, 3903 R Street. Holiday greetings to everybody in the room. Last Monday at Councilor's workshop meeting, I and several citizens were witness to a very welcome and unusual event. The start of council discussions began with Councilor Shoemaker expressing his concerns about some of the budget items. Then this took place. All 7 councilors, after the suggestion made by Councilor Freeman, openly expressed their own concerns, also asking the finance director, city administrator, mayor guard, and each other for clarification of some items. During these discussions, Councilor Greenlee, either by design or by accident, answered most of my concerns I had expressed earlier. Thank you, Councilor. My first concern was, why doesn't the budget have more details such as insurance costs being itemized? Councilor Greenlee stated that the state mandates the method and form used by the city, making it very difficult to itemize. My second concern was what happens to budgeted money not spent for whatever reason. Councilor Greenlee answered, it goes into the reserve fund. Expanding his answer, he explained that with good fiscal policies, the city has, in the past, balanced the budgets with monies going to the reserve fund at the year's end, with no layoffs required. He failed to mention that the 2012 or current budget included the filling of 1 of 2 police department vacancies and the creation of a new staff position, and still balanced the budget. The third item I still have concerns about, and the most discussed, was the proposal by the mayor to take $500,000 from unrestricted and unallocated reserve funds and create a property acquisition fund. Such property, when purchased, would only be used for parking, open space, or parks. When I left at 8 p.m., discussions were still ongoing and in the spirit of cooperation. I am confident the final budget, when passed, will be the most thoroughly analyzed, dissected, and discussed of the last 4 I have been a witness to. My hat's off to the staff, mayor, and council for the hundreds of productive hours that have been expended in the preparation of the budget. And Mayor, when the budget is passed, I think you have the authority to cancel all the rest of the meetings for the rest of the year so the council members can come back refreshed and ready to do business.
Here, here.
And I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Harvey.
You're welcome.
Richard?
Richard Hamby, 37015 Southeast Gibson Road, Washougal. On the same subject as last week at your workshop regarding the fact that my business, which operates from outside the city, and at which at this point I have no knowledge that I will have business next year in the city, if I don't preemptively buy a business license and pay the state, then I am going to be imposed with a penalty of a late fee at some point in the future, even though I would be doing that act before I actually had a job that required your business license. I know that's an unintended consequence of the system you have in place. Not only last week, but when I brought this issue up some number of months ago, each time Mayor Gard has said that the state is soon to be mandating that every city use this system. So I looked into that. I actually talked to a very nice lady up in Olympia at the Department of Licensing today, and she says that was a proposal before the legislature last year, it didn't go anywhere, probably for good reason, because I think it likely is not a system that fits everyone. She reinforced that it's a system that's put in place for the benefit of the cities that choose to use it, and it's totally voluntary. So at least in my situation, it seems to be something that needs to be corrected. The two ways that you might do it, one would be to change your city code so that businesses that operate from outside the city do not require a license, just like Camas does. Or the other one would be to take control of collecting your own city license fees again. I'd rather pay, instead of the $25 license fee, $9 to the state and $12.50 for a late fee. I'd rather pay, $35 and put the check across your counter. It's really not an issue with me about having to have the license, but it kind of gripes me that it becomes a late fee if I buy the license before I have a need for it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Any other members of the public that would like to address council? Okay. Another opportunity here before the meeting is over. Going to the consent agenda, I am going to pull item C, the regular accounts payable claims, from the consent agenda itself, which will leave items on the consent agenda of our council meetings of November 19th, 2012, our workshop minutes of November 26, 2012, and Agenda Bill 7612, an authorization for the mayor to sign the final plat of the Orchard Hills Estates plat alteration.
Mayor, could you pull the plat alteration? I want to clarify something on that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that we approve consent agenda items A and B.
Hearing no objections, those items are passed. Item number C, regular accounts payable claims. Jennifer, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Mayor and council, we added in an extra, the most recent AP claims checklist to get those approved prior to the end of the year should the meetings get canceled. We didn't want to have to convene a meeting just to approve the AP payments, so that's why we added them in at the last minute to be able to get those approved tonight. So we added checks number 60481 through 60530 that totaled $38,774.26. The revised agenda has the correct total of $141,720 for checks number 60399 through 60530.
And Jennifer, those items have already been through Finance Council as well?
Correct. The majority of the council has reviewed those and approved them.
Move for approval.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to approve the accounts payable claims in the amount of $141,720. Any other council discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Jim, Agenda Bill 7612, authorization for the mayor to sign the final plat of Orchard Hills Estate Plan alteration. Mitch, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Let's give it to Mitch instead.
Mitch, I just bring this up because I'm a resident of Orchard Hills Estates, and I wanted to make sure I don't have any unique issues that would cause me to abstain on this. What exactly does this plat alteration do?
It moved a drainage easement from the front of lots to the rear and combined a tract of land with an adjacent lot.
Looks like it didn't affect my property, or is not near my property.
What property
I'm
do
on
you-
M Loop, so I can vote on it, I believe. I don't believe I have any kind of
Yeah, I
issue
think
here.
you may be, this is actually the development that's right south of J Street that has nothing in it except for four.
Okay.
There's no houses built within the development.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve what was consent agenda item D, Agenda Bill 7612.
Second?
I've got a motion and a second to authorize the mayor to sign the final plat of Orchard Hills Estates, Inc. Any council discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, that brings us to Agenda Bill 7712, holding a public hearing for approval to apply for CDBG grant funds for sidewalk improvements within the city. Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of the council. Yes, staff requested a public hearing to invite public comment regarding using CDBG grant funds for sidewalk improvements in many locations throughout Washougal. Holding this public hearing is one of the CDBG application requirements, and recommended action is to hold the public hearing, read resolution by title only, pass, post in the usual manner.
Thank you, Jim. With that, I will open the public hearing and ask for any members of the public that would like to testify this evening in regards to CDBG grant funds for sidewalk improvements within the city to please come forward to the microphone. Good evening, Maury.
Name is Maury Seacrest. I live on 42nd Street in Washougal. I'm delighted to see that the city is moving in a direction that asks for those grants and prepares them well enough to get those grants. I'm sure it was staff that worked on it, so through you, I'd like to express my appreciation for the fine work the staff has done to get this. I think improving the sidewalks is a great idea. And as you recall, I've stood up here before and said that I really think the sidewalks around our schools ought to be improved so the kids have a way to walk to class and back without having to walk in the roadways. So I'm glad to see this action come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Maury. Any other members of the public that would like to address Agenda Bill 7712? Okay, last and final call for any members of the public that would like to speak to the issue of CDBG grant funds for sidewalk improvements within the city of Washougal. Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing and turn the resolution over to council.
Mr. Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that we read the resolution by title only.
Hearing no objection, so ordered.
A resolution authorizing the city of Washougal to apply for community development block grant for sidewalk improvements on I Street, H Street, Washougal River Road, and 20th Street.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we pass and post the resolution in the usual manner.
Second?
We've got a motion and a second to pass and post the resolution in the usual manner. Any council discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. It brings us to the main topic of this evening's meeting, which is Agenda Bill 7812, the 2013 budget.
You're
Hang on just a second, Jim. Sorry. For council members, I know Councilmember Shoemaker had asked that we distribute some information in regards to some of the items on there. And as you can see, one of the things that we have prepared for in the budget is for some discussion on the items from the reserve fund specifically for discussion prior to, if you so care to, prior to adopting the budget itself. In addition to that, we have an item that has become a bit of a nuisance and a action that we need some resolution from the council for prior to moving into the budget item itself. It actually amends a little bit of the budget for 13, something that we hadn't anticipated until the rain started coming our way. Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, and apologize for bringing this to you at such a late minute. We just received some estimates that were very good estimates on this. So I just wanted to tell you that we are revising. We have a revised budget request that we want to bring to your attention. And we have multiple stormwater pipes that are creating sinkholes in Sunset Ridge subdivision. And the repairs need to be made as soon as possible. We will be using cured-in-place pipelining to repair the system, and this is much less expensive than excavation and repair. Since we are approaching the end of the year, we recommended adding the repair cost to the 2013 budget. So total estimated cost for these repairs will be approximately $305,000. And Jennifer made changes before tonight's meeting, and you should have those in front of you now. And they refer to the Stormwater Fund. And with that, do you have any questions related to this
Well, what are the
last-minute
what are the
item?
changes? You say they relate to the stormwater funds. Was there an increase in an appropriation?
Correct. So Fund 403 is the stormwater fund. So on the ordinance page, it just shows that we're using additional fund balances, so that fund isn't balanced anymore operationally, because we're going to have to use some of the fund balance to pay for this.
So the proposed
potentially.
budget, that $1,192,000 is increased by $305,000?
Correct. Actually, it's 10,000 less than that, because there wasn't enough fund balance, so we decreased professional services by 10,000
Okay.
to get that to work within the fund balance.
I appreciate Don offering that up for.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I realize this is a little bit out of order, but any comments, questions?
I'm just curious, I'm trying to remember how old these lines are and who built them, and do we have any recourse that way?
The subdivision's not under warranty right now. I talked to Mitch the other day, and we're looking into who might be the contractor on the job. We're actually looking into possibly faulty pipe as well. So we are looking into some options, but we don't have many details at this point. Do you have age on the subdivision, Mitch? Any idea?
Top of my head, no. It was
Okay.
probably over the span of a few years, but it was completed, the majority was completed 05, 04, and prior.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Just curious, that's all, thank you.
Any other questions on the repair item? Dave?
What length of street are we talking about here? Length of pipe?
We have various pipes that have longitudinal cracks, so it's a long stretch of pipe, I guess you could say. But
That's all
there's
I
some
need to
on
know, Jim.
53rd Street, there's some on Sunset Ridge.
Jim?
Yes.
That's all I needed to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
You say you have an estimate of sort of $305,000.
Yes,
Do we
sir.
have to go through the public bidding, public works process to?
We
so
will.
Could be higher.
Could be lower.
Could be lower, probably be lower.
So far, the
Right.
numbers we've got are from our city engineer, so.
Yeah, and we do have a contingency built in.
Okay.
Can we not go to our approved contractors list for this, or is it too much?
It's too much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, with that item out of the way, I would turn to council on if you want to follow the agenda that we have, if you'd like to take a different course of action on the items from, that are being asked for from the reserve funds, or where you'd like to go.
Just, which one were you following? This one?
No, I'm following your agenda.
Okay, thank you. Let me get that.
If we want to follow the agenda, the first item is the creation of property acquisition funds, starting with a balance of $500,000 to the general fund from unallocated reserves.
Mr. Mayor?
Dave?
Is it possible to deal with this one issue first? Do we need to approve adding that to the budget, or is that just another, by bringing it here, have we added it to the budget for consideration tonight?
Which one?
The one on the street repair?
That's already in the handouts that Jennifer gave you, so that's already been put into those numbers.
Okay, so as we vote for the budget, that's in there.
Unless you pull it out, that's already in the documents that you've got,
Got it.
that were
Thanks.
updated.
That's what the supplemental is
Yep.
right here, right?
Well, just to handle the parliamentary issue, I move that we include the $500,000 property acquisition fund in the budget.
Second?
I've got a motion by Paul and a second by Dave to add the, or create the property acquisition fund and fund it, I'm assuming with a balance of $500,000 from unallocated reserves. Council discussion.
I have some problems with this. One of the things in being on the council now for 5 months, and I knew this was coming even before, is we have huge increases projected in our utility rates, and that's going to cause a lot of pain. I'm not even sure exactly what they are. I kind of get figures thrown out at me, and they break it down by funds. I'd just like to know what my bill is going to be like in February when my next one comes due. And there are a lot of things that I do agree with the mayor and the administration that we probably have more reserve funds than is really necessary. And I think the funds should be, we ought to have a discussion about alternative uses besides property acquisition. I would include within that property acquisition, utility rate relief, possibly other capital non-property acquisition work. And I would add to that keeping in reserves, as Councilmember Shoemaker suggests. So I would propose that this fund be renamed to just excess reserve funds. We do our homework on this and not rush to judgment. I know it's been out there for a couple of months now, but I don't think we've considered any alternatives to spending it on property acquisition. So I would propose that we just rename fund, what is it? It's fund, kind of written down here.
354.
Fund 354 to excess reserve funds, and that we come back in January or February and with public input decide what we should do with that. And I would move to amend the motion to do that.
Would you accept a capital reserve fund?
Well, it wouldn't be necessarily a capital reserve fund, because if it's going to go into utility rate, it has to come back. It would have to come back for a supplemental budget in any case. I guess you could rename it then. But I just want to make clear what my intent is here.
Was that a motion?
That was a motion, yes.
Second?
Can we get a clarification on the motion?
Clarification on the motion that I understand is, one, to rename the fund, and to potentially make it a broader in short, to make it potentially a broader use than just property acquisition. All of the above to be determined at a later date.
No later than the end of February is my. I would hope you could bring something back to us by then.
So I've got a motion and a second. I've got an amendment with a motion and a second to rename that fund and to potentially use it for other uses as well. Council discussion, Paul?
First thing I want to observe is that the utilities, each of the three utilities, are independent enterprises. They are, I know that everybody thinks that Washougal Water is the city of Washougal, and in truth, we do manage it. But it is a separate enterprise, and for example, money that we can't take in, that we take in on water rates, we can't use that to hire a cop or build a bike path or anything like that.
Of course.
While it is strictly legal to take money from the general fund and put it into one of the independent utilities, it's rarely done and statewide, and is generally considered not a great idea, because you would really like the utilities to be able to stand on their own.
Can I clarify? Maybe I didn't. My interest is in reducing utility tax rates. The city currently charges on water a 20.4% utility tax, correct, Jennifer? Correct. And then on sewer, a 10% tax. I would consider cutting those rates to mitigate the, and we can't completely mitigate it. People are still going to get, big surprises when they get their bills early next year. But my intent is to mitigate that and do as much as we can. And but I'm not saying this is where I'm going. I'm saying that's something we need to look at. And I have a feeling that when we talk to people in January and February after they get their bills, there might be a little bit more momentum for this.
Joyce?
I'm not quite sure how I understand that comes into the property acquisition
It's
fund.
going to be broadened to possibly include that as a discussion early next
You
year.
mean to give that money to the utilities?
No, it's going to cut the utility tax rate, and we're going to backfill. We'll just cut the utility tax rate, and that's how it works,
Potentially.
potentially, if the council goes along with this.
Dave?
A question, I heard the term backfill.
But that was,
Slip of the tongue?
yeah, it's just
Okay.
basically fund a $500,000, up to that. We could decide to do half there and half property acquisition, or half street repairs, or keep it in reserves. But it would be just basically using all or some of that fund to cut utility taxes on our own utilities.
I seconded your motion because I wanted to discuss this and hear about what you had in mind. And the question that arises for me is, how does this relate to the current rate increases, which are based on a study that was done 3 years ago? And the rates are projected to rise for 5 years because a number of reasons, among them, we were subsidizing water rates from the general fund at one point.
Well, embedded in those rates is a tax, right?
The tax is included in what the individuals get in their bill, correct?
It's on the bill,
So it's the
yeah.
rate plus the tax
It
equals
doesn't
the amount
break
of
it
the
out.
invoice that they
The bill
receive.
doesn't break out the taxes.
No, because it's an internal tax that we charge ourselves, but you're right, it is embedded into
Right.
the rate by FCS
Right.
in that monster study.
So what the council member is talking about is not necessarily toying with the rates at all, leaving the rates where
Rates
they're
have to
at,
stay the same.
but potentially lowering the amount of tax that we levy on those rates.
And then I would ask, what do we use that tax money for?
Goes into the general fund.
Okay,
It's completely distributed throughout the general fund.
got it.
Okay, Joe?
We keep moving down the road, and I had a question about what the original motion was that Paul Greenlee
The
made.
original motion is to create the property acquisition fund, starting with a balance of $500,000 from unallocated reserves.
To leave it in, okay. Thank you.
Right now, we're on the amendment to rename it and potentially broaden the use of it beyond property acquisition. Paul?
My concern as a finance guy is that if you take $500,000 out of reserves and use it to decrease the utility tax, which goes to the general fund, what you are in really very clearly doing is taking $500,000 out of reserves and spending it operationally in the general fund.
Any other
Well,
discussion?
If I could respond to that, I'm not saying this is where we're going to go. I'm saying it's something we could look at. That's all I'm saying at this
One of
point.
multiple items,
Right.
all of that question to
We,
be
you know,
interpreted
I
at a
may,
later
after
date.
hearing that and hearing your arguments, Councilmember Greenlee, I may decide to return to the property acquisition option. I may decide there are other capital needs that the city needs, or I may decide that Councilmember Shoemaker's right and it needs to stay in reserves. But based upon what, we haven't considered any alternatives, these other alternatives so far, and I would like a chance to do it, and I don't think I can get the information tonight to make a decision on that.
Jennifer?
I completely agree with Councilman Boker. I don't feel like I have enough information. I feel like the $500,000 is entirely too broad a fund to set aside from our reserves, and I would definitely like more time to talk about it and think about it if we, as a council, decide to return those to the unallocated general fund reserves. Then that should also be an option as well. I would like to support Councilmember Boker's motion, so I will be voting in favor of it.
Okay, Joe?
I like the idea that his motion, well, probably wasn't in the motion, it was in discussion, that we have a deadline. I would like us as a council to address the issues that Dave Shoemaker brought up last week about getting more than a mission statement, I suppose, getting priorities, prioritizing what we as a council see that our job is, streets, sidewalks, these specific top priorities. I would really love that we have that conversation behind us before we make a decision on that 500,000. So I know we're having a retreat. I'm not sure if that's the right place to do that or if we do that here. I will trust your expertise on that, but that is really valuable that we set some priorities and then we can address that 500,000 and be assured that if we don't know where we want to put it, that it can stay right where it is for now. Thank you.
I support Councilmember Boger as well. This has been a tough one for me, and I've definitely talked to a number of Washougal citizens. I like the idea of more parking and green space in our downtown core and putting money into it to make it a better place for all of our citizens. But I too have struggled with just wanting to see some different options on the table as to how to get there. Maybe partnerships with certain businesses to go in on parking, parks fund, private sector for, creating green space, things like that. So I support the amendment just because I feel like I need more options.
I actually like the property acquisition fund idea. You can't actually buy property without a parcel by parcel approval by council. So in some ways, designating the fund is a signal and nothing more, because council could, in February, decide to move that money from that fund with an amended budget just as easily as they can do it tonight. There really is no difference. I'm hoping that we can take a long-term view of our downtown. There are, frankly, some derelict properties that if I were Joe Stalin, they wouldn't be there any longer. And this might help with some of that. That was certainly a topic of discussion at our retreat this past January, was if we wanted to move to somehow or other replace some of those dilapidated properties with something more attractive. I also observe that both Ridgefield and Battleground right now are scrambling, trying to figure out how they're going to create a downtown park. Esther Short Park, at this moment, is the key to the redevelopment of downtown Vancouver over the past 20 years. Before the park was renovated and some of the other things were down there, and it was very much the focus for everything. There's a famous story. Royce Pollard, less than 2 weeks after being elected mayor and before being sworn in, was mugged in downtown Vancouver. And he said that has to change. And that's where a whole lot of the energy came to creating the downtown in Vancouver, which, I mean, I've been in the Portland area since 1990, and you didn't go to downtown Vancouver after dark. The opportunity to create those park spaces is now. Property values are, in fact, off the bottom. They're not even bouncing along the bottom anymore. They're starting to come up. And once we're at the peak of an economy, it's buy low. And so I personally like the idea of the property fund and doing what we can to advance the revitalization of downtown.
Joyce?
I want to reiterate what Paul is saying. I think now is the time to make an investment in our community. I drove down Main Street today, and it's very pleasing. It's happening. And now is the time for us to buy, for our city to participate and help move this city along. So I would vote to keep this as the property acquisition fund.
Dave?
This is actually urban renewal under a different name. And urban renewal projects in this country have a mixed record of success and failure. Our mission as a city is to provide basic municipal services, not create nirvana. And our limited tax base is designed to fund that mission, not ventures. Venture capital comes from the private sector. We just saw a very good example of why we need reserves. We're going to have to take $305,000 out of our utility reserves to fund some repairs. Unanticipated requirement. We just completed this thing in 2004 or 5. What's the lifetime on these things? 50 years? Expected?
Yeah, you would expect a 50-year life cycle.
Okay. So we're, what, 7, 8 years down the road, we're faced with $305,000 we didn't plan on. The other thing, and I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if there's a vehicle for this, but we have in our audience tonight a gentleman who is a major investor in the downtown area. I would love to have his views on this particular subject. Is there a vehicle to get those views?
Sure. As long as council doesn't have a problem. Wes, anything you'd like to add to the discussion on the particular topic? Imagine that. You just got pulled right in there and didn't know it.
And I'm sorry for surprising you that way.
I mean, it's a very, very complex topic. I tell people all along, you know, what I'm trying to do here in Washougal, I didn't get up in the morning and say this is a great business venture. I believe this is Washougal's future. And I believe it's our ability to attract high-quality jobs. We live in an environment now where we talk a lot about economic development, but you have to step back and say, okay, what is the workforce? Who is the workforce? And if you look around, it's not our generation, it's a younger generation. And their expectation of what I will call urban amenities. You know, that doesn't mean 20-story buildings, that doesn't mean, you know, it's 1, 2, 3, 4-story buildings in a gridded block system where you can walk, you can bike, you can bump into your neighbor, you can have coffee, there's interesting restaurants. And when we started down this path, anybody who ever talked to me, I never said it would be easy. Everybody I've ever talked to, I said, it's going to be incredibly hard. The day we started, we had 0% chance of success. Once we got a little ways into it, we probably got up to maybe as high as 25%. But there's a lot of little pieces that go into it to ever have it be successful. But if Washougal's sitting here as the gateway to the gorge, it's got more natural amenities than any other community in Clark County. It's got all the potential. But there's a lot of right decisions that need to be made now from a planning perspective to ever realize that potential. And a few bad decisions, any building that gets built, any rezoning that occurs, that you're stuck with that decision for 50 to 60 years. You make the wrong decision, and Washougal, you know, let's be frank with each other. We've all lived here, we've all participated. In some ways, we've lagged. We haven't achieved our potential. It's here, we're capable of achieving it, but we have to have the confidence and decide we want to achieve it. And the day we decide we want it, and in order to achieve it, it's hard work, very hard work. And so we got to decide we're focused, we're going to put the hard work into it, and we're not going to follow what other people are going to be. We're going to be the leaders, and we are going to be the ones where this workforce looks at and says, you know what? Because anymore, the jobs go to where people want to live. And again, I'm a big, strong believer that if we're not able to create a vibrant, active, central core in Washougal, our ability to attract good jobs is next to zero. So the discussion we're having right now about where funds come from, where they go, what happens, right now, if you take the downtown area, there is no parkland. The parks that people use are all owned by private entities that are letting somebody use the land. The Pendleton Fields, the Angelo Fields, the Stevenson Dog Park. So we're starting to see some success. We've had some tech firms move, companies that have never ever been in Washougal. We've got some software companies, we've got an engineering company, a couple other tech companies, a medical software company. And these people are moving into this downtown because they can kind of see the potential of what it can be. And one place that we struggle with is normally when you're in one of these downtown revitalizations, there's a concerted, organized effort on behalf of the community. And today, if we have somebody come in and they say, wow, we really like what's going on here and we can see the potential and we want to be part of it, what is the city's plan? We have to say we don't know, because we don't know what the city's plan is. And without having that side of it, it really hampers your ability. We could be moving along at a much greater pace with much more success if we had a cohesive community plan and knew where we were going. It's kind of a long rambling.
It's okay, you had a lot of good words of wisdom in there.
Paul's example about Esther Short Park, I use the example of Tom McCall Waterfront Park. That was set aside years and years ago, and if you want to look at downtown Portland and the success they've had, there's nobody sitting down there today saying, you know what, I wish we could build a shopping center or condos on Tom McCall Waterfront Park. That makes that downtown. And we participate in some other projects, and we participated recently, a couple years ago, in a project in the Pearl District. 400 and some employees moved into the building. They're paying very, very high rents. We would have no way to attract them out here because their employees want to be in the Pearl District. So the company's willing to pay higher rents to be in a place that they consider their employees want to be in. And I think when we talk about economic development, we got to shoot for being the community that people want to live in, and the jobs will follow. It can't be the other way around. In all my businesses, I've always kept it very simple. You get up in the morning, what's the goal? The goal is to be the very best you can be at whatever business you're in. Well, our job here is to be the very best community we can possibly be. And if we were the very best community we can possibly be, these other issues will take care of themselves. When you're a very great community, you can pass bond measures because your citizens are connected to your community, they believe in what you're doing. When you're a great community, jobs move there because people's employees want to live there. So I think we got, in this broad context, again, where the funds come, how it's budgeted, but as we sit today, we do not have a park in the downtown. We have employees moving in here, we have some success occurring, and you don't want to wait until land prices have gone back up and then have to start looking around and say, how are we going to buy a piece of land for a park? And additionally to parking, again, I'm not related to the budget, where it comes from, funds come from, but in an urbanized area, parking is shared. Each individual business doesn't build parking because you can't have walkable, bikeable, livable streets without shared parking. So there has to be some master plan that says, as we are successful, as we move ahead, this is what it's going to look like, this is where we're going to have parking. These are little pockets here, little pockets there, and this is whatever it might be. But there's some strategy for how that's also going to be funded.
I wish we had more time. No, I do, seriously.
Yes.
Well, I'm trying to get you
Dave?
I'm trying to get you 90 days, Mayor.
Okay, I understand.
First of all, I appreciate that very much, and I think you've got a very good point. We need a plan on where we're going.
That's right.
And the only disagreement I have, I think, with some of my colleagues here is where we get the money to do that. If we're going to use park impact fees and various other sources of funding to fund parks as we traditionally have, and we focus on the downtown area, I think that's a great idea. So far, I think we've focused on areas other than the downtown area for that sort of thing. Maybe we should focus on that. Another thing that we need to look at is if we have another park, do we have the people to maintain it? We're pretty slim in that area. I think we've got something like 3 employees. But I agree, we need a park. The question is, how do we get there? And that's I think, our only disagreement. I seriously doubt that anybody here doesn't believe in parks.
Connie Jo?
No, it's interesting how that we aren't in disagreement. We all agree we need a park. Especially, I like the fact that we need a plan. And I feel, as a new city council member, that maybe I'm behind the 8 ball because I'm new, but I haven't been shown a plan. I just suddenly got a book that said $500,000, let's get a couple of pieces of derelict properties. I am open for conversation. Just last week you saw me say, could we talk together? Let's talk for as long as it takes. When you say, I wish we had more time, we may not have time tonight, but we could get another 90 days to have a lot of conversation on what your goals are. You've invested an awful lot in us. We're investing time in our heart, and we're all investors. We're all invested, I should say,
If I can just affirm, I'm investing my time and my heart.
Exactly. That's what I'm acknowledging and appreciate. I don't know, did that come across wrong? No, just the fact that we have to continue these conversations. This is very healthy. And I just thank you that we're at this place. If we need to, February is just around the corner. That's a blink of the eye. We're not saying let's not attack this. And I agree with our council member that we have to know where these funds are coming from. We have to be careful. We have things we have to spend it on, infrastructure, now that we find out sinkholes are happening. Let's keep the conversation. I think you see, Mayor, I think you see an awful lot more. I know that you get a lot of more presentations than what we hear. You have conversations with the businessmen. You're out on the ground, and all I get is an hour a week and some documentation. It's not enough for my needs to help me get the big picture of where we've come from and what our direction is. So I welcome the plan. Lay it out. Let's chew it. Let's chew on it.
Paul?
Quick question. Sorry, I had my mic off. Quick question on park impact fees. Do we charge park impact fees on commercial or only residential?
Residential?
So and do we have a substantial impact fee balance at this point?
$390?
Roughly 390.
And just while we're looking for it, historically, my memory is that we've, by and large, used park impact fees as matches for grants and other sources where we had to put up part of it, but because in many cases we could put up $1 and get back $4 more, the leverage on using impact fees that way is terrific. And the other thing is that if we have to wait for single-family construction to generate park impact fees, that's the wrong direction. Roughly speaking, on a statewide basis, the number that you hear is that a single-family residence costs $1.25 in services for every $1 in tax revenue it provides. $1.25 for every $1 it provides. So because you get sales tax on the process of building the house, there's a temptation to want to build and build and build, but ultimately then you're going to have to pay for that. And the only way to pay for it is with retail, commercial meaning office, and industrial. In many cases, the general fund costs of a $1 in tax revenue for an industrial site is about 15 cents. And for a retail, it's 65 cents to 75 cents. So if we're going to solve the looming structural deficit that we are all so concerned about, looking out at 14 and 15 and 16, we cannot do that by building more houses. we have to have more business, retail, office, and industrial, to make the numbers work. And because of that, because we don't get park impact fees from any of those others, only from residences, it just won't work to go that way.
Jennifer?
Too. I disagree that we don't have park space downtown. We have a pocket park. We also have Reflection Plaza, which is considered a park. It has places for people to sit. It has trees that are growing very slowly. But, I mean, there are areas, I mean, it's paved, obviously, that's not a green space, you know, with playground equipment or anything like that. But it is a spot where you can step away from your desk and grab a coffee at Papa's and go across the street and sit and enjoy if it's sunny. So I think that, you know, the city's investment in Reflection Plaza is also very good and could be thrown into the mix there. I also wanted to point out that real estate excise taxes can also be spent on parks. It's just one of the things that it can be spent on, so it's not only park impact fees, it's real estate excise taxes as well. So just thought I'd throw
What's
that in
that
there.
figure?
Well, it doesn't matter. It's allowed by statute. Your previous councils have pretty much captured all of your real estate excise tax, both 1 and 2, for the repayment of the downtown general obligation bonds.
Correct, but when that is said and done, then we can take a look at spending it in other ways. But it's fluid. Parks, trails, bridges, streets, roads, sidewalks, etc.
Other
How much longer till
Comments?
those are paid?
14 years?
Yeah, I was gonna say like 2026 maybe.
Mhm.
It's a while.
That was a significant investment in our
Yes.
downtown, very significant. That's basically the direction the city decided to go at the time. So I would say we definitely did have a direction, and we went for it. We were paying for it.
Brent?
One of the things that I have a little, I don't know what the right word is, but I don't, skepticism, whether this $500,000 would make that much difference, whether that's going to be the catalyst that, you know, starts downtown redevelopment going like gangbusters. When I applied for this position 5 months ago, one of my big things was redevelopment and economic development. I'm still for that. I want to see a plan, and I want to have a little bit more deliberation about it. I may still end up supporting this, but I just don't have enough information tonight to do that, and I can't satisfy what I consider my fiduciary duty to do that until we spend the next couple of months looking at it. And I'm all for it. I'm all for what you're doing, Mr. Hickey. I appreciate it.
Any other comments, questions? Can I, Joe?
It almost seems random right now. So seeing the plan, I think that's the key. Seeing a plan.
Okay, so right now we have on the table an amendment to rename the what has been proposed as a property acquisition fund, and to potentially broaden the uses of those funds. From an administrative standpoint, I don't have any problem with that at all. I don't believe that anybody's under any rush to get this done and get it going. I think one thing that may be helpful, and one thing that to some degree in process clouds the issue of park impact fees, the downtown development, all of that, or what we've asked for the funding for downtown, probably isn't a bad idea. Rose, if you can make a note, let's go ahead and schedule an executive session off of one of the agenda, either a meeting agenda or a workshop agenda, whichever one is lightest, soonest, to go over literally potential property acquisitions, not only the ones that we're talking about downtown, but the other ones that I alluded to last week that will probably suck all the rest of those
Could I
park
ask
impact fees as well.
Question, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
We've talked about the what I think will be soon renamed the Excess Reserve Fund. We've talked about park impact fees, and we talked about REIT funds. Do we have any other sources of funding for property acquisition in downtown if we wanted to go in that direction?
Well, property acquisition, you don't have park impact fees for, I'm not so, REIT can be used for economic development activities. I don't know, other than general fund and excess general fund, which is in essence reserves.
Or taking out debt.
Yeah.
And the REIT balances are minimal at this point, are they not?
They're not minimal, but they're tied up for, we're gonna have a couple of balloon payments come due on the downtown debt that we're saving for. And I've mapped that out based on where REIT's coming in. When the bond was passed for the downtown, REIT was coming in at a much higher rate. And they projected those balances to stay with that that amount of money to come in every year. And it has dropped significantly since that was approved. So we're maintaining the slurry seal program out of REIT 2,
Yeah,
one of them.
I think in 2006, we built 470-some single-family houses. We won't do 50 this year.
So while they have significant balances in there, they're just not able to be touched at the moment.
And it's one of the things as well as Jennifer does quarterly updates from year to year. It's not something to get excited about either. If you see all of a sudden big balances in there for, I don't know that we ever received an explanation from bond counsel. It is not a steady repayment on that bond. There are some years that we pay $130,000, $150,000, and then the next year we pay $430,000, and then we pay $160,000. It is bizarre.
They throw in a call every now and then too, just for fun.
Yeah, so, again, as you see those updates, that repayment, if we're talking about repayments and you see different things in there and all of a sudden you see big balances, those big balances are still dedicated to that one item. It's just on a very bizarre repayment plan. Or Dave?
If I could get a clarification, you wanted to rename this as the excess reserve funds? And my concern there is I don't think we can define yet what is excess to our reserve needs. And if you flip over that piece of paper that I provided tonight on the issues that I was going to raise, it says other suggestions. And the first one is schedule a workshop on emergencies such as floods, fires, earthquakes, and storms to estimate general fund reserve needs for a worst-case scenario. Until we've done that, I don't know that we can say we can put money into an excess reserves, because once it goes into the excess reserves, my impression is that it's available for projects.
No.
Not necessarily.
No. And we've again, we went over this last week. We have said that any funding that goes into this fund, any potential expenditures coming out of there would come back specifically to council for approval.
Yes, but when you call it excess reserves, you've more or less designated what it's for.
My specific intent in bringing the motion is that we would consider, I can think of 4 things, there might be some others that people here, with members of the public could think of for it, but it would be property acquisition in the downtown area. It would be possible utility tax cut. It would be holding it as reserves and or other capital projects that don't involve real estate acquisition, like maybe our streets need a little bit more repair than they used to get, than they're getting.
Amen to that.
So we just take a look at all these options. There's 4 that I can just come up with off the top of my head, and I'm sure there are more. And so it's not my intention. Excess reserve was just, I'm trying to find a name for it. I'm struggling a little bit, maybe contingent reserve. I don't know what kind of name, but it's not my intent that it's going to get spent necessarily.
A point of clarification, Mr. Mayor? An affirmative vote on this particular motion would take this $500,000 temporarily out of the budget?
No, your first pending vote is just to rename the fund and potentially open it up for other uses other than property acquisition. We haven't got to your main motion yet. We're still on an amendment.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yep. Other items from council? A couple of the other things I wanted to make sure and point out to council. I know, Councilor Shoemaker, you've got some items that you put forward on there. And no other way about it. I would certainly, any of the dollars that the city is looking to invest into downtown, I would call urban renewal. That's exactly part of what it's aimed for. We just wouldn't be flipping properties with these monies.
You would call it. I couldn't.
Absolutely. If we buy up a derelict property and we make it a park, I'm not sure what else you'd call that other than urban renewal.
Make sure I heard you right.
Yeah. In regards to venture funds, venture capital, any of that, I certainly don't see anything happening with venture funds at all. Venture funds to me are things that are put out there on a risk basis. What we're proposing is that we put funding into particular properties, specific properties into the downtown, and redevelop those properties into both parking and park areas, not to be resold, not to do anything with. There's no venture as part of it, as is known in the business world. And certainly, I understand your comment that urban renewal programs, succeed in some areas, they fail miserably in other areas. Quite frankly, I'm only concerned with what we do with any of these type of activities in Washougal itself and go from there, so.
I share your concern.
Any other,
And I acknowledge your concern.
any other comments or questions in regards to the amendment? So I've got a motion and a second to rename the former Property Acquisition Fund to Excess Reserve Fund, and to potentially broaden its, at council's discretion, broaden its use to other things other than property acquisition in the downtown. And I'll repeat again, there is no intent from the administration, if this remains in here, if it remains in the budget, to do anything with any of those funds until those particular items come back to council and are approved specifically by council. So with that, I've got a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Roll call?
Councilmember Boger,
Yes?
Councilmember Plinsky. Councilmember Greenlee,
Nay.
Councilmember Lindsay,
Nay.
Councilmember McDaniel,
Aye.
Councilmember Shoemaker,
Nay?
Councilmember Freeman.
Aye.
Okay, 4-3, motion carries. Back to the main motion, I've got a motion and a second to include the excess reserve fund with a starting balance of $500,000 in the budget proposal. Council discussion. Okay, all those in favor?
I guess at this point, where this is debating whether it comes out of reserves or gets designated as an excess reserve. That's all that we're doing here.
At this point, my belief is that your vote currently is to, basically, would be to, one, keep it into the budget, and two, seed the new excess reserve fund with $500,000 from unallocated reserves for you to designate at some point in the future.
Okay.
Specifically, my understanding is that it would create Fund 354.
Correct.
I'm sorry, it would create?
It would create.
It would create Fund 354.
And
Okay.
just further clarification, it won't just create it, it will create it, and if it remains in the budget, we'll fund it.
Yes.
Okay, any further council discussion?
Yes.
Can I jump?
So if we choose not to spend it, it goes right back into reserves.
It would still be in reserves.
It's just,
It's still.
it is reserves.
It is reserves.
But it's no longer unrestricted reserves then.
No, it pretty much is, I don't hear any restrictions on it, so it would be unrestricted reserves.
Okay.
But it would require our approval.
It is excess reserve fund. Dave?
And here's my concern. We're a small city. We have a small tax base. Camas got out from under that because of the vision of its leaders. Nan Hendrickson, back in the early 80s, had a vision for Camas as hosting industrial properties, industrial firms. And they spent a couple $1 million I think it was around $2.5 million to put the utilities into a big utility park out there. They built it and they came. And today they've got a tremendous tax base compared to the city of Washougal. I would love to be able to do something like that. But as it stands right now, we have a very limited tax base. And I would like to see that tax base devoted to the mission, which is supplying basic municipal services. As Trevor Evers once pointed out to me, you might think that public safety is the most important thing in the world to people until a toilet doesn't flush. Well, that's a basic municipal services. We provide water and we provide sewer. And I think that's what our job is. And I'm concerned about departing too much from that mission with the limited reserves that we have. We saw a very good example tonight of how we can be hit with $300,000 worth of requirements on the reserves. This particular reserve requirement hits the utility reserves, doesn't hit the general reserve. Not unheard of that we could have something come out of that. And so my suggestion, before we create a fund like this, is to find out, is to try to define what level of reserves we need. I don't think we've ever done that. We built them up during good times, we draw them down during bad times, but the question is never answered, and in fact, never even asked. What is the level of reserves that we need to insure ourselves against disaster? And I've listed 4 of them here. I'm sure there are others. They're the ones that came most readily to mind. So I'm not in favor of creating this fund at this time until we can define what we need in the way of reserves. To spend this money, I think, is a little on the foolish side. Thank you.
Cutting Joe?
Well, I reiterated earlier that we set a time frame, say by the end of February, but before we do that, we discuss these concerns that you have, Dave. I mean, would you be comfortable with that? We define these goals of the city. And if in those goals we need to address the reserves, I talked about that last week. Let's make a decision, 2 decisions. What do we want for reserves or unrestricted reserves? We already have the 16% for the other. What do we want for those reserves? What do we feel comfortable with? And then secondly, what are the major goals of the city? What are the functions? Let's get those established.
Just a point of clarification on the reserves, the 16% requirement. That's a requirement, I believe, from the Association of Washington Cities about, it's a recommendation, or is it in statute?
It's your own policy.
It's our own policy, okay. But that's basically for cash flow and things like that. It's not, you can take money for emergencies out of there, but when you do, you're putting your cash flow at risk. And risking not being able to pay your bills on time until the next increment of tax funding comes in. So Mike Briggs's letter tonight talked about the 16%. Yes, that's a requirement, but that's specifically used for cash flow. And while it can be used for other things, every time you use it for other things, you put your cash flow at risk. So until we can define the level of reserves we need, I think it's prudent to delay this particular action until we can figure that out.
Mr. Mayor. And that's what I've done. Basically, my intent in bringing this is we're just thinking about this at this point, and we're going to take a look at it by the end of February. That's why I hope the administration can come back with some proposals and some ideas. And Mr. Mayor, you're not going to spend this before we get to February, are you?
I'm not going to spend it until you let me know that we can spend it if it stays in there.
So it's just, we're thinking about it.
And I'm pretty sure that Ms. Forsberg will hold me to the rules. Pretty sure.
So that's where I'm going with this. I just wasn't ready without more information to budget this money. This is the most important thing we do. And I want to spend some time thinking about it. I know I've had a couple months since we got a copy of the budget, but we have not been given any other alternative use for it, I guess, other than keeping it in reserves or spending it in property acquisition. I want some time, and I actually want the administration to flesh these things out too.
So then why vote on moving it forward into a new fund? That's what he's been trying to say. We're all in agreement, but we're still talking different language here. We want to wait. Why make a fund?
Well, if we didn't do anything, it would still stay as excess reserves. It wouldn't get
Exactly.
spent.
So-
It's just set aside. We've identified this issue. We're going to come back and narrow it, and we'll be able to make a decision one way or the other in February.
Joyce?
When will we have the report from the strategic plan, or on the strategic plan?
I believe we should be prepared to bring that forward in the very early part of January. We've discussed doing it at the retreat, which I'll bring up in a little while. But I've asked David to set that aside for basically as much of a standalone workshop as we can rather than a retreat, because I want to put the focus and the emphasis on it.
That may give us some of the structure that I think we're feeling we don't
There-
have.
Yeah, in addition to that, though, we also, I believe David has also put on the agenda for the retreat, the whole discussion that you're intimating now in regards to reserves and excess reserves and dollar amounts and all of that, to get through that question before we dive into the bigger one of, over the top of that, if you so choose and you pick a number that's something less than what we hold now on reserves, what your wishes would be for any additional amounts or any priorities as we move forward. The whole question on priorities, all of that is built into, frankly, is built into a lot of the strategic plan. It also, when we talk about mission statements and what are we here for and what are we supposed to be doing, for those that haven't read it, I'm sure that we can get it electronically sent out. There's one on the back of the wall that is still a live mission statement and a live strategy for this community. In addition, Mitch, if you could, make sure and send out the downtown plan that was adopted a few years ago to all of the council members so that they've got that as well. And that's one of the items that we have asked, moving from the strategic plan, that we pull that back out, since that was done pre-recession, and make sure that that still hits on all the cylinders that you all may want it to. All of that was adopted, and there are a lot of assumptions in there that were before everything went boom. So we're trying to bring those forward as quickly as we can. Joe?
Well, then I'm going to ask, I'm just going to state my opinion then at this point, is that I'm going to ask that, I'm going to agree with Dave Shoemaker that we hold off, that we remove this from the budget based on a lot of discussions that we're going to be having in the next 2 months. Joyce, I appreciate you reminding us of the projects coming to us, and Brent, I believe you're saying the same thing. So why create a fund when we have all of these discussions to have? So,
My thinking is if we identify the fund, we've kind of set it off on an automatic track where it's going to come back to us, and we've narrowed the issue to this fund. And that's a discussion that I think we'll be ready to have again early next year.
So, Mr. Mayor, the motion on the floor is
to create, in essence, to create it and give a path to fund it. Your funding won't actually happen until you adopt a budget in some fashion anyway, if it's in there.
okay, so we've resolved the creation of it, have we not?
Nope. That's the question that's that's one of the questions that's under consideration right now.
I thought that was resolved in
we
the...
resolved the name.
All you did was amended the name to it and the use of it.
Okay, so now we're creating and funding.
You're creating and at least indicating a pathway to fund it. It won't be funded unless you actually pass a budget that includes that in there, moving from reserves over to the new excess reserve fund. Technically.
I'm opposed to creating and funding it at this time.
Exactly.
I'm open, I just, like some of my other colleagues here, I need to look at this very carefully. I need to sound them out on this, because I'm just not ready yet. and I regret that I'm slow.
Nope,
But
it certainly,
it's a serious issue.
it's a $500,000 question, so it certainly deserves full questions and answers.
That's the
Karen.
part that got my attention. $500,000.
But regardless of the fund, I mean, we can still
It's waiting for us.
spend the money. If we don't put it in a fund, we could still spend that money next year, correct?
You could, we'd have to go through and do supplemental budgets
Okay.
and amendments to them. Again, as I mentioned last week, I believe there's also and some may disagree with it, I believe there's a philosophical message to be delivered to folks like Lone Wolf, to Mr. Hickey, to other folks in our downtown that, and I realize that we may do some other things with it as well. We may not even end up buying any properties in the downtown. But I believe that there is a message that you send to the taxpayers and the folks who move about in our community that you are hoping and planning to move forward to do something and not just let it sit where it always sits. That comes from my adage of if you're not moving forward, especially as a city, you may as well be moving backwards because your treading water isn't going to help you. It's not going to move you at all.
So how complicated is it to amend the budget come February after you've had this whole discussion?
Jennifer, do you want to go through the process?
To amend the budget, we don't have to do a budget hearing or anything. We just bring it forward for discussion again and then vote on an ordinance to amend the budget.
Sounds simple, though. It seems that people that listen to this conversation, I think they're pretty much well aware that we are very interested in pursuing. It's just we need to read it, we need to find better. It's not that we're not interested in business. We want to attract business. We want to help with fees, and we want to help with preparation, infrastructure. So, it is full, did you use the word philosophy?
Brett?
If we adopt this, it just becomes another reserve fund, correct? And it just stays there until we decide what to do with it. I don't, as far as a matter of effect, I don't think it's really doing much of anything. It's just that we've kind of crystallized that this is the level that the administration believes is comfortable with as far as using reserves. This is what this represents, right? Well, I don't have a problem with that. That's why I call it excess reserves.
Dave?
Move to separate the two questions of the creation of the fund and the pathway to the funding.
I'm not sure what that means.
Means I don't have any objection to creating the fund, but I do have an objection to moving money into it from the reserves. And I'd like to consider each of those issues separately. In other words, down the road, I'd like to have that fund available as Councilmember Boger has defined it. But for the time being, I don't want to fund it because I don't think we're ready to take that move yet.
I don't understand how you create a fund with no balance.
Oh, we can do that easily. Zeros are zeros. We have funds that have zeros in them.
You make it available, Paul.
Well,
That's the easiest thing you could possibly do. Jennifer,
And you won't
contain
get a lot of
yourself.
argument either.
again, it's just a sub, it's, it's not a sub-account because we have separate accounts, but it's just like a subset of our overall reserves. We're just putting it into a separate accounting area that this is what we're going to come back and talk about in a few months. That's the way I interpret it.
6 to 1, half a dozen the other.
Step 1 out of 10.
And although I don't concur with you entirely about the uses of the fund that you propose, I think creating it is a good idea. It gets us on the road to letting people know that we're looking at doing some things. But until we define the needs for the reserves, I'm reluctant to use reserves to fund that fund.
And my belief is, from the discussions I'm hearing, at some point after some number of meetings, and I'm not here to bet that it would be and we'll certainly bring the information forward, whether it's the end of February, whether it's the end of 2015, doesn't matter to me. at some point unless you, as a council, decide that you want reserve funds in, the 50% mark, that type of thing. At some point when you finish that discussion, you're going to have excess reserve funds. You're going to have allocate or restricted funds, your 16% or whatever number you may change that to. You'll have some other amount, 10%, 9%, 25%, something in there, and then you'll have that are unrestricted, unallocated, and then you will have excess reserves that are up and over the top of that percentage. My belief is, unless you set a high number, that you're gonna end up with that at some point anyway. And I would think that you would want those segregated just, again, so that in the budget document itself, yourself, the public, anybody can look at them and somewhat reasonably be able to identify what the funds are set aside for, or that aren't set aside for anything. Okay, at the moment, I have a motion to separate the two issues. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, hearing none, that motion dies. So we still have a main motion on the floor for the creation of the excess reserve fund.
Call question.
Okay, question's been called for. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries. Item number 2, a reduction of estimated development permit fees, fee revenue for fee holiday of $76,000, which is indicated to come from the unrestricted reserves as well, should they be needed.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the fee holiday for the narrowly defined fees and developments as described.
Okay, I've got a motion to, I'm sorry, Paul, what was,
It's a motion to approve
okay,
the fee holiday with an estimate of $76,000 to come from general fund.
okay. I've got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I've got a motion and a second. Council discussion. Dave?
Point of clarification, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
Is this being funded initially from the reserves?
It actually probably wouldn't be funded from anything. I believe what we're going to end up doing, and Mitch and Jennifer can correct any of this that I'm going to get wrong, is if this takes place and is approved, we will, as of January 1, begin not charging for building fees, any of the fees that have to do with building, with the exception of, that have to do with building in the commercial, retail, and mixed-use side, with the exception of transportation impact fees and system development charges. So if we end up having some number of folks take advantage of that to where we've generated, in essence, a $50,000 loss come the end of the year in that fund, we would be looking to recover that. If we haven't recovered it just from general purposes and not having expended all of the money throughout the year, we would be looking to bring that over from reserves.
But if no one ever took advantage of it, there's actually no cost to the city.
There's no costing, there's no funding for it. Likewise, if we end at the end of 2013 and if $76,000, if $86,000 has been attributed to that, we're still trying to just make sure that we end up with a balanced budget. So it still depends on what the rest of the budget, the expense budget in the community development department does. If Mitch keeps hitting the ball like he has been, quite frankly, we end up with an excess there every year. But what we're saying is, in order to balance the budget, we need to have that safety net underneath of it if there's no other place for it to come from, that it would come from the reserves. Dave?
And I can support it on the basis that you just described. If we can recover it from savings through the good management that you've practiced for the last 3 years, I think that's terrific. If we can't, and we have to take it out of reserves because we got hit with things like that utility requirement tonight, I understand that. I'd be most upset, however, if it went to some frivolous purpose, but I haven't seen you spend money frivolously lately. So I can support it.
Have you at all?
On that basis.
Yeah, and both items 2 and 3, the 21,000 for IT, again, as we've noted last week.
And the answer to your question is no, I haven't.
Yep, thank you. You know, in total at $100,000, we've been through the budgeting process and through the philosophy that we've had of being very conservative on the sides of revenues. We believe that both of those are going to be absorbed in what would be leftover amounts rolling over into 2014 anyway, but we're required to balance the budget. So in order to do that, some communities, quite frankly, just like Camas, some communities will literally call that programmed use of reserves. We know that we're programming them in there. We don't want to spend them, but in order to balance it and not cut other things and make sure that we're doing what we should, we're willing to use that. Some literally use them just for those items to help balance the budget, knowing that they're not going to bring in another dime. Not the case in this one. Jennifer?
Yes, I just have a quick question about this particular proposal. Did this come forward through our Economic Development Association?
Nope.
Or what was the, basically the idea, or how did this come forward?
It came forward from myself, I believe, by way of council. I think we've been pretty clear hearing over the last couple of years, a lot of discussions about trying to do everything that we possibly can for businesses. I remember a protracted discussion less than a year ago about completely eliminating our $25 annual fee for a business license. All of that gets right back to this one of what can we do in order to do that. Those discussions came right through the council themselves. Conjo?
2 questions. So how do we eliminate that $25 fee? Something we do as a council.
You can make it a portion of this.
Second question is, we don't feel the need to put a cap on this, because spending more than that's even better, because that means businesses come in.
I would look upon it very optimistically that would be a very good thing.
Be a good thing to spend this.
The estimate itself, not counting business licenses, the estimate itself is literally an average off of what we've typically brought in.
How many businesses do we have listed? Do you have an estimate that we collect $25 from? What is that?
The revenue side is roughly $20,000 a year.
Well, I sure would like to visit the part our friend has brought up, Richard has brought up, when you haven't got a history of working inside the city. Would be good to address at least those. Those are minimal. There's very few of those probably.
Well, no, and I think we need to address that with the Department of Revenue anyway, and how they are actually administering that. I mean, we have business that we do in Puyallup and in Federal Way, and literally it's for one tiny little portion of an event every single year. And we're required to have a city business license because we're within their city
Right.
conducting business. We just bill it right back to the client, and they know that.
So can we have administration, how do we go about addressing that for Richard's sake?
Well, I think first it's a discussion with the Department of Revenue. We
I see
have
what you're
certainly
saying.
not, I don't believe that we have sent them any instructions that have said, please collect a late fee and please collect a $9 fee. Those are not things that we've done on our side at all. I know the issue itself is supposed to be coming back up in some way, shape, or form in regards to the entire Department of Revenue issue of B&O taxes that I believe now 40 cities within the state collect. And it's all tied into that entire master plan of the state collecting all of those.
Someone is going to deal with that?
The legislature is.
Oh, I thought you were saying we needed to discuss it with them.
No, I believe we need to discuss with them separately the whole issue of late fees, all that type of stuff. Because if they're charging a late fee because somebody didn't renew a business license in the city of Washougal, I don't believe we're getting that late fee, are we?
I don't think so. I haven't looked at the reports closely enough to know.
And it may be that we back out of that program. Paul?
Thank you.
If I could just add to that, the reason that we went to DOR and L&I to collect these fees is that if you're a company that does business in a lot of different cities, you really would like to have one-stop shopping and not have to go to every single city hall in Clark County to get a business license.
Other discussion in regards to item 2, the reduction of the estimated development permit fees? Brent?
I've been skeptical of this proposal because I don't know whether it was worse that I became a lawyer or I could have become an economist, because that was the other option. I was considering pursuing a PhD in economics, and one of the things, sorry Joyce, but I do believe in supply side economics, and cutting taxes and fees should, all things being equal, should encourage economic activity that wouldn't have happened otherwise. That's basically at the heart of this, and that's what we're doing here. It's just that I believe that this is so small in the overall scheme of starting a business that I don't think it will start. It will encourage people to do projects that they wouldn't have done otherwise. However, I'm willing to give the proposal the benefit of the doubt. I would like to see the experience with it the next year, and I will be supporting this.
Other comments from council, questions?
Just
Jennifer?
a quick comment, and I'm going to also support this. I think it basically is another tool in the toolbox, something that our Economic Development Association can put down on the list of, things that we're doing to encourage economic development and bring in businesses. Like you said, it probably isn't going to be very much money. No one may take advantage of it, but at the same time, it is something in our toolbox that we can use.
I would like to add, I did have a conversation with the county today, and they've had a couple of programs like traffic impact fee waivers. They don't believe that has made any difference, and that's a lot more money than this is. However, the same county person says, well, building permits, that will encourage your small businesses to do do some things, and so that comment softened my skepticism about this, and that's why I'm going to support it.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, I've got a motion and a second to approve item number 2, the reduction of estimated development permit fees and establish a fee holiday. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 3, allocation to equipment replacement revolving fund, information technology capital of $21,000 from the unallocated reserves.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we include the allocation to the equipment repair and replacement fund for IT capital of $21,000.
I've got a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to approve the allocation to equipment replacement revolving fund of $21,000 from reserves. Council discussion. Jennifer?
I definitely think we need this. There really is no revenue source other than the general fund to fund these types of things for, our computer systems and our internet systems and our website and our communication systems here. And so I'm going to rise in support of this particular item.
Paul?
My only comment is that I'm flabbergasted that $21,000 is all we need.
Well, that's not all we need. That's what we missed by once we knew how large the problem was and how large the bill's going to be from funding it a year ago. We would have included that in there and made it a larger ask at that time, so.
Okay.
So it's one of those, we're coming back to the well a second time, if it's needed. Again, just like the previous one, if we've got revenues coming in and expenses are down and we don't need to move this from the reserves, we won't. Karen? Any other questions? David?
As the mayor points out, we're coming back to the well, coming back to tap the piggy bank again. I don't see why we can't find $21,000 in the budget with good management and fund this out of the budget. We keep hitting that reserve, and until we've defined what reserves we need, I'm reluctant to do that. That's the reason I brought this up, and for that reason, I'll be voting against it. Although I recognize the requirement. I'm an IT manager.
Paul?
I would just observe that we don't have final numbers for 2012 yet, but that our budget, while technically balanced, took money out of reserves, and revenue was a little higher than we had planned, and expenses were a little lower, and we'll be in the black again this year, like we were the year before and the year before that. So the point is that really there's some fiction involved in writing a budget. You tend to be very pessimistic on both the revenue side and on the expenditure side.
Unless you're the federal government.
We're not. In fact, Paul Lewis, when I kind of quizzed him on that 3 years ago, what his projections were and how he based them, he said he looked at the situation and he would choose a number so that in his best estimate, it would be good news 80% of the time. Not just 50% of the time, but 80% of the time. So that means that you make a projection on your revenues that's low and a projection on your expenditures that's high. And surprisingly enough, year after year, we've had good news on revenue and good news on expenditures.
Dave?
I understand budgets. I've been doing them every year since 1968. What I don't understand is the idea that we had a balanced budget. I'll give you an example. 2010, we came out $300 and some odd thousand to the good. Good management. Major accomplishment. In March of 2011, we put forward a supplemental budget for $560,000, which spent everything that we saved and almost that much again. And we have done that every time. The only reason the budget balances is because we pull money out of reserves. We've pulled as much as $1.5 million out of reserves at one time. And I think we did that for the 2009 budget. That was before most of us were on the council. I wasn't there. But I was astounded that that was called a balanced budget. So I disagree on the concept of the balanced budget that's balanced by using the reserves. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Karen?
How much are we going to be in the black this year? Do we have an idea?
Remember what your estimate is? It's only an estimate.
I won't hold you. I won't come stalk you.
I believe it was a little over 200,000.
Some more money for
Roughly.
property acquisition.
I think for all your purposes, you've already included some portion of that in the estimate of what our reserves would be on hand at the end of 2012, correct?
Yep.
For what? I'm sorry.
For 2012, you've already used some of those numbers in
Some of which numbers?
the 200 and some odd that we may be in the black for this year, in calculating what our reserves would be at the end of 2012.
correct.
You've got those in there, so.
Correct.
Sorry. Wish. We've done that math already. Any other comments or questions from council? Okay, I've got a motion and a second on the floor to allocate $21,000 if needed to the equipment replacement revolving fund from unallocated reserves. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay?
Motion carries. And then item number 4, which gets to funding within the utility fund, creation of an agency fund to be called Low Income Assistance Program with a starting balance of $95,000 from the utility fund. These funds will be used for assistance to qualifying residential utility customers for paying city utility bills. Such program subject to council approval, and that said fund and allocation be included in the 2013 budget ordinance.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we include the creation of the agency fund, the Low Income Assistance Program, with a starting balance of $95,000 in the 2013 annual budget.
Second.
I've got a motion and a second to create the Low Income Assistance Program and funding it with $95,000. Council, Dave?
Point of clarification, where is that $95,000 coming from? It's utility reserves, I believe?
No, it's not utility reserves. It would be the dollars that would normally, well, not the normally, that are probably still going to come in that are late fees and reconnection fees that our utility customers are paying now.
So it's based on our estimate of what those fees will be?
It's based on an estimate of what our fees generally have been and that we're estimating in the 2013 budget as well.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer?
I think his question was where will where the funds are coming from. It's utility reserves, correct? So
No.
it's the initial seeding will be from utility reserves in the amount of $95,000.
Yes, we'd be pulling, 95,000 was the number that's it's approximately what we collect annually, so we would just be moving the funds that we collected in 2012 to seed the fund. So in essence, yes, it would come out of the ending fund balance of the utility fund.
So the utility, the $95,000 wasn't budgeted to be spent on any particular thing?
No, because I think I don't know the exact number, I can find out here, of what we budget for in the water sewer fund for penalties is not that high. Because obviously, we don't want them to be that high, so we don't want to rely on a revenue stream that's not there.
Correct.
You have the 401. Yeah. Need to look at my page numbers. Bear with me for just a minute, I'm almost there. This page. Sorry, thank you. Oh, we have been budgeting for the 90,000, I apologize. In 11, they were actually 97,000 in actual water sewer penalties. So that amount is included in the utility budget. So it's been adding to the ending fund balance.
And just to clarify, even with the potential addition of this program, we're not proposing to eliminate late fees and reconnection fees or any of that. All of that stays intact the same way that it is today. Joyce?
How do we determine who qualifies for this? And who does that?
The City of Vancouver just recently implemented this program as well, and they're utilizing a free interlocal agreement with the caveat that they could possibly charge in the future. But currently, the PUD provides this as part of their LIHEAP program. It's a federally funded program to where they pre-qualify people that are within the PUD boundaries, which all of our citizens would be, and then they bring documentation to us showing that they qualified for assistance. The City of Vancouver has some requirements. They can only do it once every 24-month period. They have to be threatened to be, or not threatened, but in the default and turn-off stage. They have a lot of requirements that we're going to bring forward for discussion on how you want to run the program. They've had only about 15 to 20% given out so far, so they're not having to reseed it. They're having the donations come in, because that would be the hope, would be that the donations from the community to support those in need would come forward, and that would keep the fund afloat until those could come in.
Thank you.
So there's still, even though this isn't asked to include this in the budget, there's still an entire policy piece that will come forward before this entire program is even activated.
Okay, I understand.
Karen?
So basically, we're anticipating that our revenue for next year would be $95,000 less
No.
due to not taking in
No, we're still going to,
We're just
we're
gonna
still
pay it
going to
from one to
collect
the other.
the late fees. This is just
Okay.
taking part of the ending fund balance. And the number we chose from the ending fund balance is just the annual fee income for the late fees. To find the magic number, because really,
Gotcha.
it could be any number. That was just how we got to that, using the, well, this is what we collect from folks that need assistance, because they're getting the late fees.
Okay.
But we will still collect the revenue.
Is an ordinance going to come back to us for the, it's going to establish the program, or is that going to be done administratively?
No, we would bring all of that back forward for
You
policies.
set policy.
Okay.
Connie Jo?
And at the end of 2013, we revisit this because we need to see whether or not the community has supported it in donations. And then we decide, well, they did or they didn't. We continue the way it is. Oh, I guess my question is, are we going to, if the community does not support it in their donations, are we going to need to reseed it then every year?
That will be a question for you if it's, depending on how much of it is even utilized. And you'll certainly
Yeah.
see those in your quarterly updates
It's just
as
a
well.
redundant question. Just for the record, I guess, that we need to acknowledge that it's a possibility that it may not be funded. So, but we're still collecting. And- But yet, this year, we're spending. We're going to be
We'll be
spending.
and
collecting, we'll still be collecting as well.
Yeah, we're collecting and spending. So at the end of the year, we assume we'll have a wash, approximately, give or take.
Well, we're only, well,
Well-
it depends.
Yeah, we don't know that we'll spend it all, do we?
I don't know that we'll have enough people that come forward for the program
Exactly.
to spend it all. Vancouver has not had that happen.
Yeah, even if you
Oh.
did, make no doubt, I wouldn't call it a wash, because the utility's gonna have $95,000 less money at the end of the year.
Yes.
Because we will have used it to basically pay ourselves on behalf of other folks for the assistance program. Jennifer, you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. I just, this $95,000 coming from utility reserves is basically an amount from the late fees you've collected within 1 year, correct? But
Correct.
that doesn't cover their actual utility bill, just the late fees?
Correct.
Okay, so when we run through this money, this is going to happen relatively quickly, I see. I mean, if we're paying their entire bill, or is this just a subsidy?
That would be the question. Vancouver's program, they only pay the delinquent portion of the bill up to, I believe, $200. And that's once per customer every 24 months. So it just depends on what council wants to do with the program and what type of program we want to put together. But there are definitely restrictions. They have to be within a certain poverty level to qualify for the program, low income, obviously. So it wouldn't be for everyone with a
Right,
delinquent water
I
bill.
understand that. It's just that doesn't cover their actual bill that they owe the city. It's just the
Right,
late
and-
fees. So
Well, the revenue side would just be the late fees.
they're
The-
struggling to pay their bill anyway. That's what I'm saying.
Right,
How is
and-
this going to help them?
Well, it
We're
would
just
allow
paying their
them
late
to pay
fees.
their bill. It wouldn't pay so the money to seed the program is coming from late fee revenue, but the payment to us won't go just to late fee revenue. It would be for their bill. So $200 toward their actual bill,
Oh, I see.
not their late fee portion. So it will help them because they'll be able to pay their bill.
So possible
And
bill
not get their
reduction.
water turned off.
Correct, their water will stay
Assistance.
on. As with our payment arrangements that we currently do, if people abide by the payment arrangement, we do not charge them the late fees and penalties. We work with folks. So that, I would assume that would be the same sort of policy we would follow. I mean, obviously, we're not going to use the
Right.
money to pay their late fees. We would waive the late fees and apply that payment to their actual payment amount.
And you might not actually have the answer to this question, but I'm just curious to know, other cities our size, are they doing this as well?
I'm not sure. I haven't done that research yet, but I know
I
that.
mean, I know CPU, obviously, they're
Right.
very, very large, and they have the resources to, investigate, whether or not these people are truly,
And that's why we plan to utilize their services. We wouldn't do any sort of that investigative portion. And they're audited
okay.
annually by the state auditors through the LIHEAP program because it's a federally funded program. So we would be able to rely on those audits.
So, do we have a staff member that is in charge of, talking to people and arranging these, you know, payment plans or any of this stuff? Or is this going to be, are we going to need an additional person to handle all this?
No, currently Lee and Rachel and Jessica, we kind of all step in as needed, but Lee is primarily in charge of working with folks with their bills. Rachel helps folks at the front counter as well. So it would just be another tool we would have to offer folks. And we have had citizens at the counter that actually want to help assist folks. We've had people that are behind someone in line that's struggling with their bill. They pay it anonymously for them. So the customer, the citizen, has put together a payment arrangement, and there's not a lot of discretion at the front counter sometimes, so conversations get overheard, and then the next person has come forward and actually paid that bill for them. So I think there is, you know, community that wants to help those in need, but again, until we put the program in place and see how it all pans out, I can't say for certain. But I don't think it'll need additional staff time. That's why we would bank off CPU so that they can do all the legwork. The folks would come in with a voucher form or like a duplicate copy form that says, yes, they've been approved through CPU for one-time assistance.
And CPU has no problem, like you said, there's some sort of program that we can get on because I think this is some sort of confidentiality issue or something.
We wouldn't
coming
get
from CPU.
any income information. That's why it would just say they're approved. So we wouldn't have to do any sort of confidentiality on that side. That's why we would want to piggyback off of them so that we don't have to collect tax statements. We don't have to collect any of that information. It'll all be collected confidentially through that program, and we would just get notified.
Thank you.
Dave?
I'm going to disagree with Mike Briggs, who sent us that wonderful letter. I don't believe that municipal government belongs in the charity business. And I would say to Mr. Briggs that charity begins at home. You want to contribute to this? Pony up. The reason I say that is that I don't think that our revenue base is sufficient to fund things like this. And I am aware that among my colleagues there are those who would tell me up front that the Washington State Constitution allows for contribution of public funds to, is it the indigent or the poor, Paul?
Poor and infirm.
Poor and infirm.
The poor and the infirm. But because of our limited revenue base, I don't think we belong in that business. We're already raising utility rates every year for 5 years. And I don't want to aggravate that situation by putting $95,000 at risk of not being repaid. Programs like this one work well in larger service areas where many people make charitable contributions. And the Vancouver area is one of those areas that I understand it works very well. There's no guarantee it'll work here. And on that basis, I'll be voting against this particular provision.
Karen?
When could we find out about possibly going to monthly billing?
I haven't been, we haven't had that conversation yet. We can definitely schedule that.
Yeah,
if
we've,
so directed.
frankly, I've been trying to get the finance staff through, one, getting staff back up from the folks being gone, and then also getting through the budgeting process itself. I think there are 2 or 3 questions that need to be answered in that. You know, the simplest one is, how much is it going to cost us to send out X number of bills on a monthly basis versus every other month when they go out now? To some degree, a doubling of that. Then there's a further question of what's the additional cost to be able to do things on a stuffing basis, to where it actually goes through a mail house, goes through some other hands that can insert things in if that's what council wants to do and that type of stuff. The other question is, and the biggest portion of it, which is going to drive the costs of doing that, which negatively hit the utility fund as well, is internally, operationally, how we have to do it in regards to reading of meters, not reading of meters, downloading that and generating all of those and having it set up, and any changes that we've got to make to our software system in order to do that and make it do that side of it.
Okay.
Frankly, a lot of that is wrapped up in the entire IT discussion itself and how that system is used. Right now, we're using a system that's used throughout the city. other municipalities don't necessarily do that. They've got something that's set up just for those utility billings and that type of stuff. So on the surface, it sounds like a very easy question. Underneath, it's going to take a fair amount of staff time in order to actually answer that question accurately in all of the different ways that we have no doubt we're going to get side questions coming back for. So I would love to say in the first quarter of 2013, but that
Maybe not.
assumes everything stays on an even keel the way we're going. So.
Okay. Is there an option now for us to put, on our bi-monthly bills, like for people to, add a $20, donation to a fund instead of us?
We have a
maybe-
certain number of characters that we can print on the bill. Currently, it's referring folks to the website for the upcoming rate change.
Well, yeah, her question goes even farther, though. Even if you put that on today, we don't have a mechanism in place for collecting that.
Oh, no.
This would establish that, to collect
Correct.
it, to even hold it, to do anything else with it other than to credit it to your bill.
Yeah, I mean, could we, save the money by donations in 2013 instead of us funding it? Let our citizens and see where we're at the end of 2013 and then, start offering assistance in 2014?
That's an option, yes.
Sure.
We just thought the council wanted the direction of having assistance available, and not knowing what the community will do was why we included seeding it to start. But yes, we can definitely create the fund and then just set up the program and see where it goes.
Okay.
I just think it makes sense to seed the fund. And if we get contributions adequate to cover the costs, then the seeds can come back out.
Okay, Joe?
I tend to have the exact opposite. I believe that if the community wants to help those in need, that we need to start asking, set the fund up to make it available. You've already mentioned that Vancouver doesn't usually spend what they've set aside. Did I
They
understand
just
that?
started the program, maybe within a year ago, if that. So I don't know how well they advertised it or.
I tend to think of setting up a savings account for people to be able to tap into. And I also believe that we shouldn't